Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Compliments of the season.
The same to you, sir. I was just going to say, this is the one I see I can spot with my corner eye, your Christmas tree there.
Oh,
Compliments of the season, sir.
thank you.
Good evening, sir. I think with the World Cup going on, it probably would be a good one to talk about World Cup, which reminds me, sir, I'm still supposed to go to Qatar for the finals.
How did you manage that?
I won the contest the last time.
You did?
I did. I won the contest the last time.
Mm.
But sir, one thing some people have raised about the World Cup before we go into the questions today is that the giant of Africa is missing from that World Cup. What's your take on that, sir? Were you expecting us there? Did you think we would have made it?
It's very distressing that we are not there uh, in any capacity. And it's interesting that commentators, not even from Africa, kept referring to the Nigerian team. That's 1974,
94.
or something with Brazil.
Yes, sir.
They kept referring to the skill and mentioning names, JJ, Tijani Babangida, and all those, and one felt, what again is responsible for our fall in skill? Everything in Nigeria has fallen. We know that. But must the sports fall as well? But what is even more agonizing for me is the fact that I think about 4 or 5 officials from Africa are officiating in this World Cup, and none from Nigeria. They don't even find any of our officials fit to be linesman, center referee, VCR or VJR, whatever. None. And let's not beat about the bush. Our integrity, the integrity of Nigerian officials cannot be guaranteed. It's as simple as that. They also read Nigerian newspapers. They find our referees and officials being accused of one thing or the other. It's a shame. It's a disgrace. We should really be ashamed of ourselves that we are found wanting in every aspect of public life. There is a book, I understand, I haven't read it myself, by a former Nigerian coach, no, a former foreign coach, who in that book accused Nigerian officials of asking him to, well, let me not let me not cross a red line. But we know there have been accusations that coaches selected if they are prepared to share their salaries in foreign exchange with officials who are involved in the process. And look, several of the coaches of teams have been players in their national teams. How come it's always in the case of Nigeria, we go and look for foreign coaches who have never played in their life? Not only that, tell me, which former Nigerian international has ever headed the Nigerian Football Association? Why is it that it's people who have nothing to do with football who end up running our NFA, running our football associations, or our athletic associations, for that matter? So why we applaud how far Morocco has come, but as you rightly put it, now we should hang ourselves in shame. No, there's no beating about the bush about our performance and our absence in Dubai.
No, yes, Qatar.
In Qatar. Oh, of course, where there are millions of, when it comes to spending stolen money, we're in Dubai. It's in Qatar, where you must have skill to be there, that we are absent. Typical history.
Yes, well, some have said it's endemic of the corruption that we have in Africa.
And no, not in Africa, in Nigeria.
In Nigeria.
Don't let us use Africa to cover our face.
Absolutely, sir. I agree with you, sir. But I do remember the story of one of the main players for the French team who wasn't accepted in the national team of his country because he wasn't willing to, his father wasn't willing to pay the bribe that he was asked, and took his son to France, and now he's one of the star players in France. So it does cut across a little bit. So let me ask you this. Last week, we talked about, I think it was last week, we talked about the South African president and the challenges he was facing with the money that was found on his farm. And now he has filed court papers challenging the report, which could potentially lead to his impeachment. Did you see that coming, sir?
No, I didn't see it coming, because if you recall what we said last week, that South Africa has developed a system that holds the feet of power to the fire. They've raised the level of accountability. The bar has been raised so high. And those who have occupied the high office of the presidency had actually played faith with the Constitution, the ideas, the values, and they've made Africa proud of them, that in confronting corruption, they have rediscovered their integrity. And what do I mean by that? Mandela, who was never accused of anything, was begged to take a second term. He refused. I've served one term, I'm going home. I've done my bit. And that's what he did. Now, When Thabo Mbeki faced issues, he accepted decision of the ANC. He didn't play games. He resigned and allowed Zuma to come in. When Zuma was held, questions were raised about some issues involving integrity, malfeasance. He also accepted the decision of the ANC and went back to Zululand, and is still even involved in a case of contempt of court, which has involved him serving some time in jail. Now, here comes Cyril Ramaphosa, who got into the presidency because Zuma resigned. He had to resign because of the issue of corruption, integrity, and what have you. And now is the turn of Ramaphosa. He now decides it's no longer a question of integrity, it's now a question of legality. He's going to challenge the findings of the tribunal in court. And of course, you know what that means. If a case is pending in court, unless you yourself want to be held guilty of contempt of the court, you've got to stay all further actions. And lawyers are very good at playing the technical game, adjournment, cross-examination that should take 2 days, it ends up taking 2 months. Because they will ask for documents which they don't even need, but they know it will take time for those documents to be produced. But in the meantime, the time for election is just around the corner. And the ANC had taken the position that, well, since the president has taken the case to court, they themselves will have to stay action. Something that is not well known is that, in fact, Ramaphosa has purged the ANC Central Committee and loaded it with his cronies. There is this syndrome of stepping aside, which he introduced when he became president as one of the ways intended to fight corruption. And that is, anytime an allegation is made against you, you step aside from your membership of the National Working Committee. And he has used that to purge that National Working Committee, leaving just people who will do his bidding. Now it is his turn, and all of a sudden, the stepping aside syndrome does not apply. He's going to court. I think it's a pity that he has now poured. I don't even know what language to use. He has diminished not only his own status, but the status of South Africa. He has now lowered the bar which they had set. Compare that with what has just happened in Argentina, where their vice president has been tried, no question of immunity, convicted, and I think how many years? Is it 7 years or 9 years? for, again, corruption. I'll take the question of Peru, where their president has just been impeached and removed for malfeasance, influence peddling and all that kind of thing. Although I think in the case of Peru, their National Assembly is mad. If they have impeached 6 presidents in 5 years, then the problem is not with the presidency, the problem is with the National Assembly. Because from day one, they've refused to cooperate with the president. The other exact details, well, they'll all fight it out, but that's an abuse of the process of impeachment if you impeach 6 presidents in 5 years. But back to South Africa, I think Ramaphosa is wrong in what he has done. It's not even, as the tribunal said, what the law says in South Africa is that it's not a question of you being guilty. You must not even have the appearance of having brought the office into disrepute. How can they find millions of dollars in your, under your bed, under sofas, and that amount of cash in your house? And all you can do, as the tribunal said, you gave them the name of the Sudanese who came to pay in cash to buy buffaloes from his farm. Why all this dealing in cash? Is it so that you won't pay tax, if that story is really true? And when they asked him for the address of the Sudanese, he said he doesn't have the address of the Sudanese. So the tribunal said, you've brought this office into disrepute. Now you are going to court to challenge that. I think that having praised South Africa last week, I think one would be right to call them out today.
So let me take you to Germany. We've talked about coups. We've talked about this in the context of a lot of African countries where we've seen a lot of this. But never once did I think I'll be putting a question to you about what has been branded as a coup attempt in Europe, Germany specifically, in this case. How do you react to the news and also the use of the word coup, a plan to overthrow the government? How do you respond to that news, sir?
I didn't believe my ears when I first heard it. I thought I must have dozed off, and that they must be talking about, as you rightly said, an African country or something. No, in my lifetime, there had been a coup attempt in Europe. In fact, I grew up inheriting military dictators in Europe, Spain and Portugal. But there was an attempted coup in Spain after the return to democratic rule or to civilian rule. But that was a long time ago. And I could never in my life have imagined that we would be talking about an attempted coup in Europe on this program. Having said that, There are three things, 3 points I like to make on this issue. The first one is are we witnessing the January 6th virus? Are we witnessing Trumpian virus in Europe? Trump sought to overthrow the American government by force of arms, Vietnamese. And he almost succeeded, if not for, I would say, the courage and integrity of a handful of people. His vice president, the speaker, the chairman, services chiefs, the Secretary of Defense in the United States. They were really the ones who stood firm, or else you would have had the coup d'etat in the United States. Like COVID-19, has that virus moved into Europe? Secondly, I am happy that the German authorities are not handling this with kid gloves, because they could easily have said, a few drunkards, who were, that were rounding up, and so they called it by what it is. And I suspect the reason the Germans have done this, even though I noticed that in all the international global media that have had this, they have not mentioned the elephant in the room, and that is Adolf Hitler. This is precisely the way Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany. He also attempted some violent overthrow of government. He and his SSL were arrested. They were jailed. I think it was called the Munich plot. They were jailed, and then they were released. And then they went up as a political party to contest an election which they didn't win, but things were arranged because nobody took them seriously. So probably at the back of the mind of the German authorities is the Hitler experiment or experience. Even though these people did not make any reference to Hitler, they made a reference to the Kaiser, the emperor, before the First World War. Thirdly, which is why this is a dangerous thing, was one of their justifications for what they were going to do was that the treaty ending the Second World War was not fair to Germany, and that Germany has been ruled by the victorious powers of the Second World War. I think everybody on this program will immediately recognize the familiarity of that justification, because that was what Hitler used in Germany. That the Treaty of Versailles that ended the First World War imposed unjustifiably sanctions on Germany, and that really it wasn't fair. And that resonated with the Germans. So this time, these ones also have brought us that justification that the sanctions imposed, or they didn't use sanctions, but they said the conditions imposed on Germany at the end of the Second World War means that the government of Germany is a government that is not, I've forgotten the word that they used, which also is what the people who believe in the conspiracy theory are using on Biden in the United States. That is not a legitimate. That the German government is not legitimate, that it is actually really a foreign government, is being foreign directed, foreign driven. And to think that, when you look at the linkages, Hitler was not a German. Hitler was an Austrian. And one of those arrested in this plot is also an Austrian. And then there is the Russian factor. One of those arrested is a Russian. Have they made overtures to Putin to support them arising out of the Ukrainian war? Because Germany had been more forceful than any of the other European countries in its supply of weapons and in its support for Ukraine. So we've talked about the drift to the right as a result of elections in Europe. To me, this is another branch of it. If you can get to power through elections, then you can do it through military means. So it's a very dangerous development. And the last thing I will say, unless there's a follow-up question, is I hope we are not going to have copycats in Africa. Because if it can happen in Europe, well, it's no longer an African disease. It's now a universal disease. God help us.
Sir, but there is one thing about this group that I want to put you before I can see a question from someone on YouTube. Can you please give a little bit of clarification to your question to this person on YouTube so I can put it forward? I'm not sure I understand the question you've put there. A little bit of clarification, please. Thank you. Sir, the point I was going to make is that one thing about the ideology of this group, as you've rightly said, is challenging the legitimacy of government based even on the Constitution. They're saying we don't recognize that Constitution. And I think there are two constitutions now that the group is saying they do not recognize. And I know that I have had that same rhetoric, not only about Nigeria specifically, but even some other countries where people are challenging the legitimacy of the constitution that's running the government. While people are allowed to have grievances, how easy or difficult is it to respond to the point around legitimacy of constitutions?
You've really blown up this program tonight. If you don't recognize the legitimacy of our constitution under which you have been ruled, then where are you looking for the power to give you a new constitution that you will recognize? And I am not sure that those who continue to raise that issue of unconstitutionality or illegitimacy of the Nigerian constitution have averted their mind to who abolishes that constitution and who grants you a new constitution if it's again is not going to be a use of, well, it's going to be by a use of force, because are they going to have to dissolve the National Assembly, just as these people were planning to do, to dissolve the Bundestag? Again, a replay of Hitler. You know, Hitler burnt down I think it was called Reichstag at that time, and blamed it, of course, on the communists and the socialists. So if you don't accept, I mean, let me deal with two separate issues. Number one, and please, maybe I'm even prepared to be challenged by our eminent colleagues on our program on this issue. Is there anything wrong? No. Let me put it that way. Is there anything unique about the way this 1999 Constitution came into being that is different from the way the 1979 Constitution came into being? As DGNI, one was vicariously involved in the processes that led to that. The military itself picked a handful. There was supposed to be 50 wise men. One declined. The military picked 49 wise men who sat down and prepared a draft constitution. Then the military arranged elections to pick a constitutional, a constitutional assembly that will then consider that draft constitution, which the committee, which they had handpicked. And in addition to elected members, the military also put in selected members. They were the ones who then brought the 1979 Constitution and submitted it to the Supreme Military Council. There was no referendum on that. They submitted to the Supreme Military Council, which inserted its own provisions into that constitution, like the land use decree, like the NYSC, and that was the constitution they gave us. So why was there no song and dance about the illegitimacy of that constitution in 1979, that we will now have this in 1999? The 1999 Constitution, Abacha set up a committee or an assembly or whatever you want to call it They debated, they sent him a draft. He died before he could either sign on that or amend it or what have you. General Abdul came in. He appointed a committee under a Supreme Court judge. I think it was Caribbean White. I may be mistaken about the personality, but it was a Supreme Court judge and some people that he handpicked. And they debated, consulted, whatever it is, and submitted a draft to him, which he took to, is it the Armed Forces Ruling Council or Supreme Military Council? I don't know whatever you call it. And that is how the Constitution came into being. So apart from a few, to me, not significant variations, the 1999 Constitution came into being through the same process the 1979 Constitution came into being. So when I hear eminent lawyers argue about the illegitimacy of this because it was the military that gave it to us, come on. One of the eminent lawyers, probably the most eminent lawyer that we ever had in this country, he's dead now. May he rest in peace. When he picked on that, we the people, that the Constitution lied about itself, I went to him because he was a friend of my dad. They were in the same political party at one time. And I said, excuse me, sir, have we ever had a constitution that we brought in through a referendum? People have always acted for us. So why are you picking on this phrase, we the people, that it is a lie? All our constitution have been lies if it comes to that. Of course, he looked at me and said, well, it doesn't mean we must continue to do it wrongly. We must have a constitution that we will bring in by referendum. So the second aspect then is the issue you have raised. If you don't like one constitution that has brought in, how many presidents have we had now? Don't remember. National Assembly, state governors, state assemblies, we've had all this put in place. We had even had a national conference. And I believe that the day you get an administration that goes and picks up the report of the national conference, believe me, you will be 75% on your way to solving Nigerian problems. You could take that, if you like, send it to the National Assembly, or using the doctrine of necessity, which we have used before, bring the report into being. Then at least there is, if you like, some rational process there. But to just say the Constitution is illegitimate, we don't want it, we must have a new one, without saying how you are going to have it, except, you know, it is a way of asking for a coup d'etat. I mean, the Germans, they're very thorough people. They didn't beat about the bush. We're going to have a coup d'etat. We're going to, remove this government, remove the Constitution. They have even gone as ahead as to appoint the people who will run the new government that they were planning to put in place. So in a way, I'm glad it was nipped in the bud before it got out of hands. And I hope that there'll be stiff sanctions against these people. And I hope Europe itself will become less tolerant of this movement. I mean, opposition is acceptable, is provided for in the Constitution, but organizations and movements that want to depend on extrajudicial, constitutional processes, they are dangerous to the whole of governance, whether in the United States, in Europe, or in Africa.
Thank you very much for that explanation, sir. But while still talking about this coup in Germany, I think we should also look at the situation in Sudan, because that's an example of a government coming to power through a coup, and now you're faced on how you deal with the real challenges of life that impact the people in the country. And now we're hearing that the coup leaders have signed a deal to have a transitional government in place, even though they haven't really specified the details of that. Do you think that will help the situation in Sudan?
I hope it will help. There is a famous saying that you should never get onto the back of a tiger, because the only way to dismount is to end up inside the tiger. The military got there, aided and abetted by, well, and pro-democracy forces, revolutionary forces, what have you. And then once they got there, the pro-democracy forces found out that they couldn't control the military that they themselves have egged on. And even up till now, the opposition is still divided. Only half of the opposition signed this new agreement with the military. And I was listening to their spokesperson. He said, we have no arms. We have tried to get rid of the military by every possible means, but we have no arms. Therefore, the only way we can get rid of them is to reach this agreement with them, sign this transitional agreement that allows some element of the civilians to come back to power for a transitional period. The other arm of the opposition said no, they don't want to have anything to do with the military. That is fine. You don't want to have anything with the military. Where are your tanks? Where are your artillery that you will use to overthrow or to remove a military government that is in control of tanks, Air Force, Marines, and all that? That is usually the conundrum for pro-democracy elements, not knowing where to draw the line. I have said this when we were talking about what's her name in Burma?
Aung Suu Kyi?
Aung Suu Kyi.
Yeah.
That she reached an agreement with the military. And then at the next election, you now sought to remove the military completely from the political equation. And now the military struck back and now made sure she's going to spend the rest of her life in prison. I am not, please don't misunderstand me. I am not justifying. There's a difference between justification and explanation. We scholars explain without necessarily agreeing with what those in power. For me to explain that, this is why Hitler did this, or this is why Trump did this, does not mean that I agree with them at all. I'm just giving a rational explanation for what they've done. So when pro-democracy elements decide to confront the military, just remember they have all the instruments of coercion. And the only thing pro-democracy forces have is the moral authority, the moral power, if you like. But unfortunately, as Stalin said about the Pope, how many divisions does he have? You don't need to worry about the Pope. So, to that extent, I think that what has just happened in Sudan is the right step. Don't let the military lose face. Edge them out through co-option, through cooperation, and they've said in 2 years' time, they will phase out completely back to barracks. If you don't like that, they will just stay on, and you are the loser at the end of it.
Yes, sir. Sir, you mentioned the name of former President Trump there, and it's triggered a question in my mind around the runoff elections in Georgia, which the Democrats have now want to give them a slight majority in the Senate. I'd like to get your reaction to that. But I'd also like to get your reaction to the fact that some people are saying that the involvement of former President Trump is what has probably led to the Republicans losing Georgia in this election. How do you respond to the situation there, sir?
Well, I will say that in the euphoria about the Democrats winning not only the runoff in Georgia, but winning control of the Senate. Don't let us forget, which is really interesting to me. The results in Georgia showed the Democrats 51%, Republicans 49%. In the Senate, the Democrats will be controlling 51 seats, the Republicans will be controlling 49 seats. It is still so close that I'm still amazed that in Georgia, 49% will still vote for a man who had a deficiency of character. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a sports hero, but I wouldn't, if I had to vote for a Morehouse, and that's the college of Martin Luther King, by the way, who also was in charge of Dr. Martin Luther King's church in Georgia. I would expect him to win by a landslide, but only 2% electoral victory. And when you look at the Senate, it is still so close that I wouldn't really be euphoric about the election results. And I will still continue to pray for the soul of democracy in the United States. Because if those who were anointed by Trump still came that close, it is not uhuru at all for the United States, for democracy. We should still be worried about the election that is coming in 2 years' time in the United States. We have to face the reality that the should I say the world? Maybe I should say the world is divided. Stability comes when you have a consensus of issues around which we govern, so that there will be issues around which both the government and the opposition will even, because your representatives are supposed to be your thinkers, the bus drivers, the bricklayers, even the university people. They have other preoccupations, and that's why representative governance developed, so that we have representatives who will take care of the business of governance on our behalf. But when those representatives regard themselves as enemies, and it's so divided that governance becomes divisive, political opponents become political enemies. Well, what happened in Germany and what happened in January 6th is likely to be what we're going to get in the world. So I'm not euphoric about both the results in Georgia. I congratulate the Democrats. It's going to make governance easier for them, especially when it comes to appointment of ambassadors, appointment of judges, issues on which the president will not have to depend. There was that Democratic senator, I can't remember his name now, who was like an opposition member, even though he was a Democrat. During the last Senate, he alone held the presidency and the Democratic Party to ransom. At least now you don't have to depend on him, because you have a clear majority that you can use. I recognize all that, but the state of health of democracy in the United States still gives me concern.
So I'm going to crave your indulgence a little bit tonight, given this week is going to be our last week before the break. There is this developing issue with the EU and some of the Western Balkan states, some of which have said that they've put their application in to be members of the EU, and they feel some sense of disillusion that despite having put in their request, they're still having to wait, and there are still discussions that are going on whether or not they would eventually get full EU membership. What is your view on that, and also the fact that Kosovo has also announced that they will be submitting their application for EU membership by the end of the year?
You recall when this issue came up about 5 months ago, we said the troublemaker in the EU, no, not in the EU, in NATO, is Turkey, because each member of NATO has a veto on membership, new membership. And Turkey had held the position that Sweden and I think it's Finland.
Yes, sir.
Were giving support to the Kurdish opposition party, which Turkey regarded as terrorists, and that therefore, unless Sweden and Finland decide to give them up, repatriate them, he and that Erdogan, president of Turkey, was not going to give his consent. And I said at that time that the only country that should call its bluff is the United States. And this is the conundrum, a similar conundrum that we were talking about earlier on. Overriding the veto of one member is not provided for in the NATO constitution. Suspending a member is not provided for in the NATO constitution. And yet, Turkey is doing everything that a member should not do. Buys weapons from Russia, has now decided that, it was going to invade northern Syria, which it has been bombing and bombarding, in spite of the fact that the United States has said that was compromising American operations against ISIS. He has said he doesn't care, and that he was going to move in. Well, again, I will advise Biden to bite the bullet and again use the doctrine of necessity and get other NATO members to suspend Turkey, admit the new members who are standing by and who are probably scared of what Russia may do to them if they don't get in. For the sake of many, I will suspend one. And that's the way that I thought it should go.
There's some very interesting questions here, sir, that I'm going to put to you anyway. And I think they're very good questions for us to break the season on. So this one is from Zoom. The person says, why do you feel collaborative arrangement is the best approach to handle the military? How did the US isolate its military from governance? Are you saying the military cannot be tamed by a civilian government through some other means apart from arms possession? That's the first one. I'll let you answer that one, and then I'll put the second one across.
I think we must look at environmental conditions. When the United States, first of all, the United States fought for its freedom from the United Kingdom. Now, under normal circumstances, that would have emboldened the American military to now move into a position of supremacy. But for two things. One is the character of George Washington himself, who was the commander-in-chief of the armed forces during the fight, and who then became, actually, he wasn't the first president, but everybody accepts now that is the first president. And he was prepared, he was not prepared for dictatorship. So he was not going to use or allow the military. Number two, the elite in the United States itself, who were in control of the system, were partially within the military. They also were heads of militia, because don't forget that I'm not even sure there was a United States Army at the time they were getting their independence. Massachusetts had its militia, Virginia had its militia, Georgia had its militia, and the influence within this militia of the people who are sitting down writing the American Constitution did not provide for an atmosphere where the army could have stepped in to take over. It was not like in Europe, where the emperors were in control of the armed, between the emperor and the armed forces. There were hardly, any difference. So that is really what happened in the case of the United States. I'm not sure we have the time to argue how the military can be tamed. I have given you examples of Burma, of Sudan, there are several countries where you've discovered that you cannot tame the military. Even China, the distinction between the party and the military in China is a very tenuous one. And in any case, the Chinese military is a member. Is a member of the Central Committee of the party that takes the decisions. So I don't know how you go on taming the military if they are determined not to be tamed. And do you think it's a coincidence that since 1966, when we had a military coup in this country, only in the cases of Yaradua and Jonathan, who were handpicked by a military man wearing agbada and everything, only in those two cases have we had heads of state or presidents who were not wearing uniform in 1966. we may think we have civilian rule in Nigeria, but we can challenge that. We can challenge that.
Let me put the last question to you, sir. Again, talking about Sudan here in the example that you used, this person on YouTube is saying, is there any parallel between the agitation against the military in Sudan and the NADECO confrontation?
I wonder when that question about NADECO was going to surface. I always say, look at the circumstantial factors. In Nigeria, you had what was called the rule of the maximum dictator. One man. And when there was divine intervention and he died, it was then easy for the military establishment and military structure to collapse. In the case of Sudan, it's not a one-man rule. There is a military council with very powerful military heads of, special forces and what have you, that even if you remove the present chairman of the council, that structure is not going to collapse overnight. And I think that that is the distinction between what's happening in Sudan and what happened with NADECO challenging the military rule here. I understand what you are saying, but again, remember my answer. There was divine intervention. Frankly, if Abacha had not died, Abacha would have successfully transmuted into like NASA or Fidel Castro, a civilian stroke military president with enormous dictatorial powers. Let me tell you the truth today. By the time Abacha died, believe me, when we called meetings of NADECO, whether in London or in the United States, I don't think we had more than 15 to 20 people who would show up for the meeting. Whereas at the beginning, the hall will be filled, 200. But you see, I mean, when people don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, don't forget, we have politicians amongst us. They were not revolutionaries. They were interested in power. And they were not prepared to hang on forever, fighting through demonstrations, being beaten by the rain in the streets of London. People amongst us were already reaching out to even people close to Abacha to do a deal with them. I know now everybody claims they are NADECO. I just laugh because we know each other. We know who we were. And I can assure you, by the time Abacha died, we were no more than 20, whom really that will count upon if we call the meeting and we say, we are going to do this. I don't think we could count on more than 20.
Wow, what a way to end the season. Sir, I must say thank you very much again, sir.
Thank you.
Session 121, I think we are today. Thank you so much, sir, for being there throughout the weeks. And to our viewers who have been here with us throughout the year, thank you so much. Through some of the technical hitches we had, a lot of you stayed through. Again, just want to say thank you to everybody. And yeah, once again, sir, thank you so much every Thursday being here to answer these impromptu questions that get thrown at you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
We will be back on the 12th of January, I believe it is. But the invite will go out as usual. We do want to wish everyone compliments of the season in whatever countries you are. Do enjoy the break. And thank you, sir. On that note, we end the program for the season. Good night, sir.
Wakanda forever.